Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi mining community, welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast, and today's guest is Gord Neal, who's the CEO of Well Copper, a listed junior miner who are an oxide copper focused exploration, development and production company with two proven resources, one in Arizona and the other in Chile. Gord has an extensive experience in the mining and metals sector, as well in the capital markets, corporate governance, corporate finance and investor relations, and has raised in excess of 500 million for various resourcing companies during his career. Today he's going to be discussing the journey of Well Copper, the current state of the copper market at the moment, and valuations within the junior space, obviously, plus a lot more. Gord, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you, Rob. I'm doing very well, very busy. It's one of those times of year and times in the company where I'm going at, I think, 150 miles an hour, but I'm enjoying it.
No, that's good to hear. Yeah, we were speaking off camera, and it seems there's not enough hours in the day with all the work that you've got on. So I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about your career for those who are listening on the podcast that may not know you. A little bit about your career, how you got into the mining industry, how your career's developed to what it is today.
Yeah, well, I have a science background, a chemistry background, and I came into the mining space in 2003 I used to own the second largest investor relations firm in Canada, and I sold it and it became the largest. And in doing that work for 10 years, I took a whole raft of mining companies and resource companies public through the major banks in Canada. Really got into the mining space or the resource space was in 2003 when I met a guy named Peter McGaw. And Peter was the founder of a company called Mag Silver. And I guess in my career, I've only really worked for 4 resource companies over a 20-year period, 22-year period. But they have, I've always been blessed with getting good assets for some reason. Peter McGaw found Mag, and it had the Juanicipio vein and the Valdecañas vein, and they turned out to be probably one of the richest silver deposits in the world. It's operated by Fresnillo, but I mean, when I started, it was a $50 million market cap company. When I left, it was $2.5 billion. So that's where I started in 2003 with Peter McGaw and Dan McGinnis. I've learned a lot about geology and mine building from both of those guys. I worked there for 8 years, and then and Dan McGinnis, who was the CEO, he left shortly after me, 8.5 years. I wound up taking a year off. I've done well with getting from 50 million to 2.5 billion. I owned 750,000 shares and made a bunch of money. And then took a year off, took my kids around the world, and then I decided I really liked the mining space, so I went back into it. Mag Silver was an exploration company when I left. It was going into development, but I wanted to learn about production. So I said to myself, who's the best silver producer on the planet? And I scoured around, and I found it was actually a guy in China. He's in Canada, but he had a Chinese asset called the Ying Mine. It was Silvercorp Metals, and that was Ri Feng. And Ri is a consummate mining entrepreneur, smart guy. Sent me over to China for a few months, and I looked at the operation. I became VP Corporate Development of Silvercorp Metals for about a year and a half, and that was 2017 and still 16, 17. And then midway, midway through that assignment, Ri came to me and he said, I have a project in Bolivia that I think will wind up being an exceptional silver project. He said, I can't run Silvercorp and this company, that New Pacific Metals, that the asset was in, would you run it? And I said, sure. So I wound up spending 7 years going back and forth to Bolivia, which is not easy, by the way, from Vancouver. It's a hard, it's 26 hours, 28 hours one way. And again, I was handed another asset, which was called the Silver Sand Deposit in Carangas, and they now are the biggest new mines coming on stream in Bolivia in the last 50 years. So again, I was handed Juanicipio and Valdecañas Mag, worked for the Ying mine with Silvercorp only for a year and a half, but it is a very high grade, it's narrow vein, but I can tell you, repays dividends. He hasn't issued a share of Silvercorp since 2010 until recently with his last Adventus acquisition. Again, a good asset. And then Carangas and and Silver Sand at New Pacific Metals. And again, took that company from 100 million market cap to 1.2 billion, and we did that in 24 months. So, excuse me, my experience in the mining space and the resource space has been one where sometimes you get lucky, and I continue to get lucky. And now, once I left, I handed over the reins of New Pacific Metals to a mine builder, and I took a couple of months off, and then a few months off, and then I joined World Copper. And the reason I joined World Copper was a guy named Derek White, who was a copper mine builder. He was the ex-CEO of KGHM and built the Sierra Gorda mine in Chile, copper mine in Chile, and the Carlotta mine in Arizona, and the Frankie copper mine. He came to me 2 years ago and said, World Copper has an asset that you have to look at. It's got an oxide deposit, but it's on private land. It's got water on site. It's got power on site, and it's pre-stripped, so the ore is basically sticking out of the ground. He said it's not huge. It's 1 billion pounds, and in this marketplace, you need, to be big. You want to have, you want to have 3 billion pounds of copper to make yourself serious. Maybe 2.5. But he said, it's ready to go. The copper market will be $4 a pound in 2 years. This was 2 years ago. He said you could put this mine into production, produce 70 million pounds of copper a year easily. You can get it permitted in 36 months because it's on private land, and you'd be contributing to reducing the copper deficit and getting copper into the market very quickly and at a good price. And the PEA on our Zonia project in Arizona says that at $4 copper, it's got an NPV of $447 million at an 8% discount with an internal rate of return of 42% and an IRR of 42% and a payback of 2.5 years. I mean, again, handed another exceptional project. Now, the difference in this market, the difference for me in this is when I started, it was, I think, 8 million market cap. I got it to 50 million market cap, and now we've retraced ourselves back to 12. And as we were talking earlier before we started, it's a tough environment for juniors that are trying to make their way through this market, that are sub 50 million. So it's tough.
Certainly is, yeah. And so I just wanted you to just give us obviously an overview of Well Copper and I suppose the journey since you've joined, how the project's developed, what it is today.
Yeah. So there's two assets inside of World Copper. One is the Zonia copper oxide project in Arizona, and the other one is the Escalones oxide project in Chile. The Zonia one came from Cardero Copper, and I think it was 2020, just before COVID. They folded that company into World Copper, and inside of World Copper was Escalones already, the Chilean asset. So they moved it forward in terms of doing they did some drilling in 2022. They did a resource calculation, and they did a PEA for Zonia and for Escalones. And so when I joined, and then that was 2022, and then I joined this year in 2024, and they did that over a 2-year period. And when I joined in 2024, we decided to move directly. Well, sorry, let me just back up a bit. The Escalones project is in Chile. It's a $1.5 billion NPV at 8% copper. It's got 3.4 billion pounds of copper in an oxide deposit. It's got power on site. It starts at surface. It's got a strip ratio of less than 1. It does need water, but everything in Chile needs water, and you can get water, and we figured that out. The only issue with Escalones is that just before I joined, this Chilean government put it into a sanctuary of nature, which makes it difficult to add value because I don't know how long it's going to take to get my permits. Because permits in Chile are usually a year to 18 months to get. If they put something in a sanctuary of nature, which they haven't really explained to us what that means, it probably means you double your time to get your permits if you can get them at all. So we sort of put Escalones on pause. I came in, I looked at Zonia and looked at the two, and I said, yes, Escalones is certainly bigger and more attractive to the marketplace. However, as Derek White explained to me, Zonia can actually go into production faster. It's easier to get it to marketplace. It's easier to get it it's an SXEW oxide deposit, which is heap leach. It's a past producer, so there's already 3 leach pads there. And the bonus for Zonia is this. We found 2 reports going through the files that there's potentially, what happened when they stopped production in 1977 was that they laid down a bunch of crushed ore on leach pads but didn't process them. So the estimate is that there's and there's 2 separate reports, one's internal and one's independent, between 35 million pounds and 55 million pounds of copper sitting on the leach pads. So if you do that at $4 copper, it's anywhere between $100 million to $200 million at $4 copper that's sitting on the leach pads ready to be processed. So it's basically pre-production revenue. If I scrape, now I have to verify this, it's 2 reports. The drill program that we've put together to verify this would cost about $1.5 million. I got $1.5 million in the treasury, so I can't spend it all on a drill program. I got to raise some money. But if I verify with this drill program, it's a 1,600-foot build drill program. It's not very extensive. It costs about, as I said, $750,000 US, $1 million Canadian. If I verify that there's 0.5% material on the leach pads that's sitting there ready to be processed, and I can quantify it at 30 million tons, that's $120 million at $4 copper. That's $120 million worth of revenue. Now there's going to be a cost to move it and process it, but still, I had a bank in here the other day because I am going to build Zonia. We're going to go do a bankable feasibility study, and they said if you can show that there's $120 million worth of copper that's ready to be processed on those leach pads, you won't, any bank in the world is going to give you money because you've already got pre-production revenue. We have a group, a company in Vancouver here called EMU that produces portable SXEW. So I won't be able to do anything on the project once I verify it. I verify that it's there. Then I have to process it, but I can't process it until I have all my permits. Permitting on private land in Arizona takes about 30 to 36 months. So I'll be able to process it in 3 years, but in the life cycle of a mining project, 3 years is not very long. So that's where we are with Zonia. We're going straight into bankable feasibility study. We just put out a new resource calculation, which gave us 113 million tons of 0.3. And again, 0.3 is not really high-grade ore, but when it's pre-stripped and it's sticking out of the ground in the pit, then it's economic. And that's in the M&I. 113 is in M&I at 0.3, and there's 56 million in inferred, and that's only on the private land, and that's only 1/3 of the entire land package. So we have to expand that drilling, but we're first going to focus on just getting the private land up and running on a bankable into production within the next 36 to 48 months, and then start moving forward because the pit moves, the mineralization moves from southwest to northeast, and just start moving the pit onto the BLM lands. Now, BLM lands are government lands, and they're going to take they take 5 to 7 years at the least to get them permitted. But if I start my production on my private lands, which is now, my life of mine is 15 years, if I start permitting for my BLM lands halfway through that process or 5 years into my production, I should be able to just keep moving my front wall of my pit forward onto BLM lands as I go. Now, the caveat here is I have to drill the BLM. We have to make sure that the mineralization on the BLM land matches the mineral or is greater than the mineralization in the private lands. But we will do that along the way. The only caveat is I don't know what we do know. We do have 4 holes in the northeast of the property, the far northeast, and it tells us that the mineralization and the grade is the same as on the private land. The only extra here, the only thing you have to consider is what's my strip ratio going to be on that BLM land, because the private land's already been pre-stripped. The government land has not been pre-stripped, and is that going to affect my economics?
Yeah, I understand. What would you say the biggest, or what do you feel is the biggest issue with the copper sector at the moment? And obviously, I know it's been going through a little bit of a turbulent time. But what in your view, what is the biggest issue or issues with the copper sector right now?
I would say that it's in fairly good shape. I don't know there's really any major issues. The only thing that I can see is, we have a huge deficit. If we're gonna decarbonize the world and have everybody driving electric vehicles and using solar panels and wind turbines, we just don't have enough copper. That's the main challenge for the copper sector. In the mining business, we have this self imploding equation. When we need a commodity, all of the geologists and all the resource companies zip to that commodity to try to find it because it's in favor. And then when we do find it, we find lots of it, and all of a sudden we're no longer in a deficit, and we got to get out of that metal and find the next metal. So we this equation, it happens all the time. When it comes to copper, we don't, and what we need, when you think about the cars, the panels, the turbines, and not only that, I read this morning a BMO note that talked about the fact that the grid systems around the world, but particularly in China has increased its grid capacity 21% over the last 12 months. They're the biggest seller and builder of electric vehicles in the world. They have the biggest adoption of electric vehicles, but to power them, they need more electricity. They got to run more wire, and they were talking about doing aluminum, but over time that won't work. Aluminum stretches, and you're going to have to replace them fairly quickly if you're pushing that much amperage through them. So the biggest issue is we just don't have enough. And again, that's one of the reasons that Derek White came to me and said, let's get this thing into production, because you could do 70 to 100 million pounds a year of copper for 10 years. We've just increased the life of mine to 15, so we say 15 years. And so, the biggest issue is we don't have enough copper. The other issue in the marketplace is most of the smelting capacity for the concentrates that are created from the sulfide deposits goes to China. It gets refined. It gets refined, and that's where the biggest smelting capacity is. And they're having trouble trying to sort themselves out on how they're going to make money, because the TCRC charges are at their lows right now, mainly because of the situation in the copper market. So they just don't have enough supply. So which means their demand is high, which drives up the price, which cuts into their profits, and they're trying to figure out how they can continue to work to smelt this product when they're not making money. You can't run a business if you can't make some kind of profit. So that is a big challenge for the world, is to make sure that we have enough smelting capacity to be able to produce the copper materials that we need, whether they're cathodes or they're wires or they're rods or sheets. We need to have that smelting capacity. That's an issue in the copper space right now.
Obviously, you mentioned it's a tough market out there at the moment, and being probably tough 2024. Let's talk about obviously valuations, and obviously you've got a finance background. Valuations within the junior resource market. I just wondered if you could comment on the valuations and how that is affecting the exploration and junior space. And I suppose what are the consequences moving forward for junior miners because of the valuations are pretty low at the moment?
Yeah, well, a lot of the copper space, if you're just talking about valuations in the copper space, are significantly oversold. There are, as I think I said earlier, if you're in the 50 million, 60 million market cap range or higher, you can get some traction with the marketplace, but there's a slew of companies, and I'm in that space, in that spot right now, that are below 50 million, that are struggling because it's hard to get attention, it's hard to get capital, it's hard to work your daily market in terms of getting new investors in, etc. Yeah, so it's tough for the juniors, and even the ones that are over 50 million market cap. If you looked at some of the valuations and what's happened to their market caps and their values over the last, I'm going to say 12 to 18 months, even with the movement in copper that went from 350 when I started in at the beginning of this year, or 350, and hit $5 at one particular point in time, now dropped back to 460, 470. It's tough. If you look at their valuations, they've actually had a ride down the market scale or down the graph scale. It is an oversold part of the business. Now, part of the business that is getting attention is gold, because gold has done really well over the last 3 to 4 years. Given inflation and quantitative easing, etc., you would have expected that gold would have actually bottomed below $2,000, $1,800, and I'm sure it did. But now it's at 26, and people are talking about 3,000. Of course, wars have helped that. The Ukraine war, inflation has helped it, etc. But in that commodity, that you are getting some significant valuation. But even having said that, the juniors in the space, in the gold space, are still not getting the trickle down from the institutional and retail money that's going into it's either going into the senior names, or primarily into the ETFs. And that's where the ETF market is the one that's really kind of taken over or replaced the retail group, that where retail money would go. You can get a much broader return on your money if you invest in an ETF than the individual name in the commodity space. So yeah, it's a tough, but I can tell you this though, doing this for a while, and it's cyclical. We're in a cyclical market, a cyclical sector. So if you look back at 2003, 2004, and it went from 2003, 2004 to 2007 when they had the banking crisis, and then it dropped off 2008, and then 2009 to 2011, 12, it was a spike. You get cycles in the commodities markets where you get really big jumps. The last big jump that we had was 2016, February 2016. And if you look at 2016, February to December of 2016, growth profile of almost every single commodities or resource company was astronomical. So we do get these oversellings, we get these troughs and these trenches, and then all of a sudden you'll get a commodity blast or a boom. And juniors like us have to be ready for that, because that's when you have to make hay while the sun shines. And course, if I knew when that timing was, I'd be flying my Learjet next to Elon Musk, and I would be a soothsayer in the industry, but I'm not. So I don't know when it's coming, but you can be certain that there will be a cyclical bump that will jump all of the resource names north.
Yes, and I suppose moving on from that, and obviously you said you don't know when, what would you say some of the catalysts that will happen, whether that's in our mining industry, whether that's in the economy, what are the catalysts for that change to happen?
Yeah, Rob, it's difficult for me to answer that question. And again, that would be, if I had those catalysts and could watch them, again, I'd have a couple of Learjets. But one of the things that I think happens is the market is a herd mentality. And when somebody finally realizes that a company like World Copper, for example, if Zonia was able to put out 100 million pounds or 70 million pounds of copper for 10 to 15 years, it's certainly worth more than $12 million market cap. Like it is. The asset's worth more than that. And even Escalones, even though the government has impaired it, at 3 billion pounds of copper, an oxide at surface, it's got to be worth more than $12 million as well. So we're way undervalued, and I think sometimes the catalyst is everybody looks at the sector and just looks at the asset base and says, this makes no sense. Like, these companies are worth way more than this, and they herd turns and says, we need to start getting these to reasonable, at least moving them toward something that makes more sense. And then once that happens, everybody jumps in. And then I think it's called FOMO these days. I'm an old guy, so yeah. FOMO is fear of missing out. And if one group starts to move it, and then everybody has to jump in. That's why, in 2003, 2004, it was sort of a much longer growth cycle. In 2009 to 2012, it was a bit of a shorter growth cycle in terms of lift cycle. 2016 was really only 8, 9, maybe 10 months. And then maybe it stretched into a year for some companies, but most of them, if you look at their charts, I'll use Silvercorp as an example. Silvercorp was trading for 66 cents. 66 cents. This company was producing 8 million ounces a year of silver and was trading at 66 cents. Now, I'm going to guess, but at that time, I'm pretty sure that silver was probably trading about, I don't know, $15 an ounce. I'm going to say $18 an ounce. But, it went from 66 cents in February to $6 or $7 by June. Like, those kinds of multiples, and no news, wouldn't have any kind of special news. And everybody did the same thing. But then it stopped around October, November, December, depending on the company you were in. So the window that these spikes take in the commodities sector seem to be getting shorter. Now, I'm hoping that the next one, when it comes, is longer, because we've had such a protracted reduction in value over a long period of time, over the last 3 to 4 years, 5 years. And so when it comes, I don't know what, again, long-winded answer to your catalyst question, but usually the market just realizes it's oversold and goes in en masse and tries to give it more value.
Yeah, and I was going to suggest, do you think the US elections may have a pivotal play, whatever way it goes, on our mining industry, where that herd mentality may change and then we're off to the races? Or don't you think necessarily the US election plays a part in our sector when that catalyst could be the change?
Normally elections, and I come from a political background too, which I didn't mention. I was a senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Canada for 4 years. Usually elections, when they're coming, cause markets to pause until they see who's got the reins, so that they can determine where they're going to invest. In this particular case, the U.S. election is a little bit more clear in terms of it has more clarity. because you've got Trump and you've got Harris. And Trump has come out on a commodities basis. Trump is clear. More oil's got to come out of the ground, and more metals have got to come out of the ground as well. So if he gets elected, it'll probably have a very positive effect, particularly for companies that are who have assets, mining assets based in the United States, because they'll get more attention. He'll probably last time he went in, he gutted the EPA. He just went in and shut it down. I talked about the government lands, the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM lands that we have that surround our private lands. He's the kind of president that will go in there and say, you guys are being too restrictive. You're not giving out permits fast enough. And then he's the kind of guy that will go in there and disturb things and maybe make permits happen faster. So in this particular case, if he got in, it would make a difference. Now, if Harris gets in, then it actually might have the reverse effect, because she is so liberal, and she said she's not against fracking, but to reverse herself the 100% like she's done, I'm not sure there's a lot of trust in what she says, that she would be as vigilant and focused on making sure that energy and mining and metals got a clearer path than Trump.
Yeah. Going back to Well Copper, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the management team and the people that are involved in obviously steering the company and strategy forward?
Yeah. So again, I talked about my background. I'm an explorationist and a mine developer. To being 100% transparent, I have not built a mine in the past. However, the guy that walked up to me and told me to look at this is Derek White. He's built five mines, 4 copper mines, and he brought along with him a guy named Joe Phillips. And Joe Phillips used to work for Quartz and Silver Standard and Pan American Silver. He's built 14 mines, and so I have 2 technical heads who are driving the build of Zonia, who have collectively built 18 or 19 mines. So, and with that comes a group in-house here that have helped those guys build mines. So Christophe Napoila used to work with Derek White and Joe Phillips, and he worked with Derek at KGHM, and he helped to build the Carlotta copper mine in Arizona and the Frankie copper mine. So he is actually Derek is the head of technical with Joe Phillips. They give direction on how we're going to do this, our bankable feasibility study, mining plans, metallurgy, geotechnical, I'm missing a couple, construction, engineering, procurement, all that stuff. They are the ones that give their brain power to this. Christoph is the one who crystallizes it, brings it all into focus, and then says, okay, these are the teams that we need. So right now, we just put out, as I said, an updated resource calculation. That was Sue Bird. Sue is a well-known resource geologist who's actually helping us expand the deposit. She worked with Derek at KGHM as well, and Carlotta. Myron Smith worked with Derek at Carlotta and did all of the permitting in Arizona. So he's an Arizona permitting specialist. He is the one that has told us. He's the one that's on the ground right now doing the permitting, water licenses, permitting, making sure we don't hurt endangered cactuses in the desert. He tells me that our path to permitting is 30 months. So that was 4 months ago. So we got 26 months until we get our permits. That's Myron Smith, Sue Bird, Derek White, Joe Phillips, Stuart Ross. Stuart Ross is the guy who came from Cardero Resources, the one we bought Zonia from. He has knowledge, the historical knowledge. In fact, he was the one that found the reports that show that we most likely have 35 to 50 million pounds of copper sitting on our leach pads. So that team together with Lynn Halden too. He's our metallurgist. He worked with Joe and Derek at KGHM. So we have people. What we have is a team of people who have built mines, permitted mines, the metallurgy on mines, and that's what you need to build this. That's what we need to build Zonia.
Yeah. And lastly, what's the short to medium term outlook? If you look out for the next 6 to 12 months, what's the plan of action for Well Copper during that time?
So the most immediate thing is this verification drill program, which I call it, which is with looking at that 35 million pounds to 55 million pounds, actually it is, on those leach pads, because verifying that material is still existing there. And George, our metallurgist, has said, well, if they crushed it and they put it on the leach pads, it's not going anywhere. There's no place for it to go. The only way you can unlock it is with a weak acid solution to make it into a pregnant leach solution. And if there's no acid there, and of course, it doesn't rain in Arizona for 300 days of the year, so there's no way of leaching it out. It's sitting there. We need to verify. That's our first line to do, is to verify that 35 to 50 million pounds of copper. Once we drill that, if those results come back and say, yes, you've got 0.5 copper and you've got 30 million pounds of it, then all of a sudden it's a game changer. If we say there's $120 million worth of copper just sitting on the leach pad ready to be processed, the market's not going to give me $120 million of a market cap, but I'll tell you, it will give me some discounted value on that. I'm at $12 million market cap right now. If I verify $100 million worth of metal on my leach pads, the market will, if it gave me half of that, if it gave me 50 million, I'm all of a sudden at $65 million market cap. And so it's a very significant event for us. But in the meantime, after that's done, we would be moving toward bankable feasibility study, which means I would have to do some infill drilling on my private lands to move that 56 million tons that are inferred into my measured and indicated. So I'm going into my bankable feasibility study with about 175 million tons of 0.3 copper, which will in my 2018 PEA, that was $447 million NPV at an 8% discount. So we're moving toward bankable, so we can then move toward doing metallurgy, water testing, geotechnical, geotechnical, and construction plans, engineering plans, and procurement, et cetera. So that BFS will only take us about 18 months to do. Probably, actually a little less, maybe 12 months to do. And so by the end of next year, we will have that BFS out. So that's its verification drill program for the stuff that's the material that's very important, and then moving to BFS by the end of 2025.
Right. Gord, really appreciate your time. Thank you for giving us an update on Well Copper, the journey of the company, and giving us your overview of the junior resource market, and obviously speaking about valuations and obviously the copper market. If our audience, who are predominantly people within our industry, if they want to reach out to you, if they want to follow your story and follow the journey of Well Copper, how can they go about doing that? What social media platform channels are you on?
I'm the CEO of the company, but I come from a background of we don't do anything without shareholders. Shareholders are tantamount in my business. So if anybody needs to reach me to talk to me, they can call me on my phone. My phone number is 604-57-7813. I take calls day and night, doesn't matter. Because, like I said, this is not my company. The company is owned by shareholders. I'm beholden to those shareholders, and I work for those shareholders. So if anybody wants to call me, you call me first. And if you want to call me and want to email me, you can email me at gneal, Gneal, at World Copper Ltd, World Copper Limited.
Yep. We include those in the show notes for easy access, and perhaps our audience will reach out to you if they've got any questions.
No problem.
So thank you for your time again. Hopefully you can come on the show next year, give us an update on progress on both of those projects, and obviously wish you well for the remainder of the year going into 2025. Obviously you've got a lot of work ahead, and obviously good luck with all the the metal on those leach pads and obviously get that verified, because that's obviously certainly a game changer for yourself.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Right,
Appreciate
bye-bye.
your time. Thank you for listening to this episode. As always, appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes far and wide, not with just people in our mining industry, but people outside of our mining industry. We do need to improve the branding of our industry, and we can only do that by sharing these episodes to people outside that maybe not are familiar with our industry, and especially listen to an expert on copper, which is needed for the electrification of the global economy. So appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes. And until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.